The HR Happy Hour Network is proudly supported by WorkHuman. Every year, companies spin their wheels searching externally for senior leaders. Meanwhile, their next VP is already on their payroll, recognized by peers but overlooked by the org chart. Future Leaders by WorkHuman fixes that. Using AI and real-time recognition data, Future Leaders identifies your highest potential talent 4 years ahead of schedule before they burn out, check out, or get picked up by someone who saw what you missed. Build smarter, promote confidently, build your best people. Future Leaders, only from WorkHuman. Learn more at workhuman.com. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome back to the Outwork in America show. My name's Steve Boese, joined by Trish Steed, of course. Trish, how are you?
Hello. How are you?
I am well. Thank you very much. On a Tuesday recording this after a long weekend, but yeah, I feel really good today. How about yourself?
Yeah, did you have a good weekend?
I did.
Anything
yes.
fun and exciting?
No, which was awesome. I didn't do anything fun or exciting.
Well, I needed the extra day off because I did something fun and exciting. I went to BTS in Las Vegas. Just won Artist of the Year over every popular artist there is right now. So yeah, I'm BTS to the hilt, above 100%.
Fantastic. I did hear about that. That sounds awesome. And I'm glad you did have fun. Hopefully you got some rest and are ready for action here this week
I am.
at H3HR Advisors. And that's my week-ish segue into today's topic. We're going to talk about performance and well-being, but in a slightly different way, right? Well-being and performance connected together, right? A little bit, and just kind of how we might need a rethink, right? Of what it means to be taking care of yourself and optimizing your health and your work and your overall, just approach to things in order to really be the best you can be, both at work and at home and in your community and everywhere else you want to be your best. We are so excited to welcome today Nicole Elizabeth Ward. She is an Aon executive leader, a performance strategist, and author. Her book is Biohacking for the Sales Athlete, which is a fascinating book. And I'm not really in sales really at all, but you don't have to be in sales to be interested in this book, by the way, either. So it should be just biohacking for all of us, maybe is the subtitle. But Nicole, welcome to the show. How are you?
Yes, thank you so much. Happy to be here. You're right. I should have titled it Biohacking for the Corporate Athlete, right?
Oh, there you go.
Maybe so. But still, we'll get into this, but as I was going through it, I'm like, this makes really good sense for anyone, honestly, right? And so, but before we sort of dive into some of the details, Nicole, let's learn a little bit more about you, particularly, and you tell the story in the book, so I'm allowed to ask it, right? It's public knowledge. I'd love for you to share a little bit about that big moment that happened to you right as you were like really getting going, right? You're successful, you're churning away, you're a sales leader, right? All the things. And all of a sudden, boom, something happens. I'd love for you to talk about that as well.
Sure. And thank you for the question. It was a critical point in my life and a real turning point looking back. And, to your point, my resume was great. I was crushing it in all the ways that we think as corporate citizens we need to crush it. I was successful on paper. My bank account was successful. I had a great team. I was climbing the ladder. And I was also incredibly exhausted, burning at both ends. I was not at all. I brain fog. I'd literally fallen asleep at a very important client meeting, like nodded off properly. And it all culminated when I was jetting between meetings up in the Bay Area. And I got cut off in traffic and I ended up rolling my Land Rover. And thank God no one was seriously injured in the incident, as I put in the book. But I broke 2 fingers on my left hand. And all I could think about as I was climbing out of my Land Rover, the side window, right? It was side down. And I'm crawling out and I'm like, where's my phone? I've got to get my phone. I've got to call and let my boss know I'm not going to make this really important meeting. And so that was a huge wake up call. And it was one where, I I had to pause, right? And I think there's so much of our culture in Americana where it's just drive, drive, drive until we hit something. And that was me hitting something literally and figuratively. And that started me on a journey of really understanding, looking under the hood, again, another car analogy, but really looking under the
Mhm.
hood and trying to understand what was broken. How had I let it get that far?
Mm.
Um, and I started looking into nutrition and understanding diet. At that point, I was about 60 pounds, 50 to 60 pounds overweight.
Mhm.
I had the lab work of literally a 55-year-old woman, and I was 35.
Mhm.
And I had met actually a trainer who had worked for my company, and she had stepped away from corporate America and said, "I'm going to go be a personal trainer." Well, I started working with her, and it was fascinating. Back then, we called it naturopathic medicine, but it
Mhm.
was essentially going to a functional medicine doctor, looking at my labs, and there's that phrase, "Once you know, you can't not know." That was the case. And so it started just to open my eyes to, like, what am I eating every day? How am I taking care of myself? How am I nourishing myself? And so that started me on my journey. And then it started really sort of morphed into biohacking, which, I obviously use in the title of my book because I am an
Mhm.
avid biohacker. But it's been a journey of wellness and health and optimization and getting to a place where I really wanted to share the journey with others so that they
Mhm.
could learn from all the mistakes that I've made. And I feel like if I could do it, I'm 56 years old now, and if I can do it over some of the very challenging years that we go through, especially as women, that anyone can do it. So that's sort of a shorter answer, but
Yeah. Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. I mean, I'm serious. I was like trying not to tear up as you're saying it. It resonates definitely with me. I think probably with Steve. We're similar in age to you now, but I'm thinking back to myself at that same age. And I wonder what it is about corporate America, especially that like instills that drive to the level of burnout. When you talk about the fact that like rolling your car was what it took for you to, like, hit that wall and notice, are you seeing so this is over 20 years, right? And you've been studying this a long time. I'd love to hear what you're seeing in terms of, is corporate America still in that place it was 20 years ago for the most part? Or are you starting to see them hacking, biohacking, how they relate to the
Mhm.
physiology of this?
It's such a good question. I think part of it is, I think it's gotten a little bit better, but inherently in American culture, we
Mhm.
mistake adrenaline for performance, right? We are
Ooh,
wired that
yeah,
for output, and I've lived it and breathed it my whole career. KPIs, MBOs, strategic planning, you know, nowhere in there do we talk about recovery. And that's why the language of my book is about being an athlete,
Yeah.
because
yeah,
we look at some of the elite performers, and elite athletes that are out in the world, and an elite athlete would never go into game day undernourished,
mm,
underslept, under
Mhm.
resourced, right? They would never be, they would never show up with brain fog and mentally checked out. They're going to bring their A game, but somehow we've made it okay, for executives in our culture to celebrate being like, "Oh, I'm super busy. I haven't
yeah,
slept. I skipped my meal.
Mhm.
I'm always available. Anyone can reach me." And somewhere along the way, we've started treating exhaustion, frankly, as kind of evidence of, like, importance, and that it's
Mhm.
some sort of badge
wow,
of honor. And, we see recovery as slowing down, and we see slowing down as weakness, when in fact, and the irony is that recovery is the opposite of work. It's actually recovery, excuse me, recovery is not the opposite of work.
Mhm.
Recovery actually supports work, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that athletes know all the time, which is that adaptation happens during recovery. So I think we're starting to get it in answer to your question, but I don't know that we fully have, because there's so many there's still so many rewards in place for achieving all those things, right? Intensity and, revenue, and I think those milestones are still out there, as opposed to really dropping in and allowing people the space to balance. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
Steve, I know you probably got another question
well,
here.
yeah, it becomes hard, right? I think it becomes difficult, right, in the corporate world, certainly, because much of what you're talking about, Nicole, is very difficult to measure, right? It's easy to measure quota and profit margin and, you know, operational statistics in metrics, et cetera. It's we know this in HR forever, right, Trish?
Right.
It's harder to measure. Hey, are people showing up to function at in their best capacity? Are their best selves? Are they, how is their health, right? We can go track healthcare claims, I guess, right? But we can track absenteeism, but it's still hard to draw that direct line between, hey, we're going to promote culturally, right? We're going to promote healthier is even the right word, but just a different approach to, right, how we hope people will manage their lives and optimize for both performance and recovery, right? I think the recovery point, Nicole, is such a great point. Like, we don't talk about that enough. We've done a ton of content, right, over the years on wellness and well-being. I don't think we've talked once, Trish. I can't remember talk once about sleep. I don't know why, but we haven't. And
Right.
I think that's even a fundamental kind of area, Nicole. I'd love for you to maybe comment on that just a little bit, like, and even if it's from a personal perspective, how you have you hacked your own kind of approach to getting rest and recovery to operate at your highest level.
sure. I think, whether we can recognize this currently or not, and whether we've arrived there. I mean, again, this is why I wrote the book. I believe that our nervous systems are foundation to our health, leaders included in that, right? And I feel like we've often approached, leadership and the executive world and the corporate world through this lens of mindset, but we forget that actually it's physiological first, right?
Mhm.
I think physiology is the infrastructure of health and leadership.
Mm.
And so if our underlying systems are exhausted, chronically stressed, or we're sleep deprived, we're going to be operating in a state of constant activation. And it becomes a lot more difficult, frankly, to be our best selves, right? Because all of a sudden we're not as patient as we could be. We're not as creative as we could be. We're certainly not emotionally regulated. And are we going to be making the best decisions that we can be? And so I think, leadership and being our best selves isn't just a thinking exercise. It's the whole unit, and sleep, to your question, is a huge part of that.
Yeah.
Resting ourselves. And again, not just recovery, which is important, but also sleep. It is, if, people always ask me after reading the book, they're like, okay, so where should I start? And I always say, well,
Mhm.
don't boil the ocean. None of us can boil the ocean, right? We can't do all the things.
Hmm.
But if you were going to ask me, Nicole, what are one or two things that I can do, that I can anchor to, that will move the needle, that will iterate me forward,
Uh-huh.
then that first is going to be sleep. And and
Hmm.
and it is, and I think any doctor, any functional medicine doctor, any health practitioner is going to tell you that, because that is, it's foundational. And there are many things, and I cover these in the book, that we can excuse me, do to help our sleep, which then in turn help our recovery,
Hmm.
because they are connected, right?
Hmm.
So but sleep for me, dialing that in was critical. And it's everything for me, from making sure that screens are off an hour
Hmm.
before bedtime, that my room is like a cave, that it's pitch black. I've got earplugs in, nothing to disturb. The room is nice and cool. That I wear a wearable device so that I'm getting that feedback loop,
Mm.
hence biohacker
Mhm.
here, that feedback loop on my data. So you start to notice patterns, right? Whether it's, gosh, I shouldn't have had that glass of wine at 9 o'clock, or I shouldn't have eaten so close to bedtime, etc. Right.
Yeah.
So, I share all of that because it's a journey, right? We don't want to beat ourselves up for all the things we're not doing, because we're all really good at that, which
Mhm.
doesn't help sleep or recovery, by the way. But
It's the
instead,
opposite.
really looking at what are the one or two things that I can do that will help me move the needle.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's interesting too, as you're talking about it, Nicole, I'm thinking sleep is really the result, right? It's not, oh, I'm just going to sleep more. That it's all those little things you're mentioning that are the levers that you can push and pull. And I think sometimes when you're laying there at 3 in the morning not sleeping, it feels like you don't have control of your sleep. But if you really kind of just slow that down and listen to what you just said about look at all of the elements that we actually could control to help ourselves from a physiological standpoint. Until this book, I honestly can say in all of my career of coming up on 30 years, I have not thought of not just well-being, but my own personal performance
Mm.
in this way. So I think, at the beginning we talk about this isn't just for salespeople, it is for every person who works basically, because you're balancing all these things and there are a lot of different things you can push or pull or start doing or stop doing. And I wonder, like, how does that manifest in the way that we communicate throughout our career? I know you talked a little bit in the book about sort of how stress changes communication, how exhausted leaders show up to make these decisions. Maybe share a little teaser for the book on what do you talk about there in terms of that communication and trust building for exhausted people?
Totally. I mean, if we're dysregulated, we're not going
Mhm.
to be our best selves for our colleagues, for our teams, for our partners, for
Yeah.
our children. And so recognizing, again, not to beat ourselves up and not to try to boil the ocean, but recognizing and starting to drop in to the physiology of how we're being, right? Um, and I think recognizing that, like, again, if we're showing up, people think that by slowing down, there's a weakness.
Oh, no,
Slowing
no, no.
down, actually, it's one of the greatest competitive advantages that we have. If you want to produce 30% more, slow down and allow yourself to drop in and recover, right? And to your question, there's so many things that we can do throughout the day when we think, oh my God, I'm gripping the bat. I've got to drive, drive, drive. I've got to, I've got multiple deadlines. But
Mhm.
when we stop, the teaser that you mentioned, and just set an alarm on your phone. I have alarms set all day long on my phone, to remind me to stop and breathe.
Yeah, like,
Just to do, and we can all do that at our
yeah.
desks, right? Stopping and just giving ourselves 1 minute where we just connect with our breath. And remember, we have feet,
I know, I
to
know.
drop in it and put your hand on your heart. Just a moment, just taking a minute or two to do that. Or people are like, gosh, I can't wake up any earlier to get my workout in. That's okay. Put
Yeah.
some bands in the corner of your office.
Yeah.
And when you're on a Zoom call, sit there and do this with the bands, or just pop off video and stay
Mhm.
on audio and just pace at your desk, or do 25 air squats. I call it
Mhm.
exercise snacking, where
Ooh, I
you're
like it.
before you know it, at the end of your day, you've like, gosh, I did 40 minutes of movement just because I decided to pace for my 30-minute call. You just pop off video again and you're on the call, but you're just walking. You get, all of a sudden you've got 3,000 steps in. So we beat ourselves up so much by thinking we have to do everything. So we end up doing nothing.
Mhm.
When in fact,
Mhm.
if we could just give ourselves grace and go, okay, I'm going to do these two things. I'm going to breathe, set an alarm to breathe 3 times today, or I'm going to do those, breaks of like doing some air squats, or,
Mhm.
sit wall sits, or I'm going to put some bands in my office and just, do a little mini workout. I'm going to take the stairs for 5 minutes in between my important calls, right? So there's
Yeah.
all sorts of ways that in the book, again, tips and tactics of how we can weave all that in. But it's so important for us, to regulate, especially if you're in a leadership position, because being, being physiologically regulated and balanced, it means that you're creating, instead of an environment of like anxiety or unpredictability or urgency or pressure, you're actually creating a space of safety. And that's what I believe real leaders do,
Mhm.
is create a space of trust, a space of, in order to innovate and for people to feel safe to take risks. We have to emanate, that sense of balance and groundedness ourselves, and all of these things help us do that.
Thank you for sharing that. I tell you, Nicole, I want you to have, like, an app, like Nicole in my pocket, because I'm not even kidding. Like just listening to these suggestions, I feel like almost silly that I've not thought of how to operationalize my own well-being. Like Steve and I talk about this all the time. We teach others how to do this, but I just love you're coming at it from a whole different direction. And I think it's so impactful that we're open to these new ideas, right? I love the idea of having alarms. I love the like, why am I not doing this? Steve, I don't, is it resonating with you like me? I don't know.
Yeah,
Because
I think it is. And I think it's interesting because, like, in the corporate world, right, we're all operating, if we're in the corporate world, right, we're operating inside of a culture, inside of an organization made up of a lot of people often. It can be even for leaders, depending on their position in the organization, a lot of what that environment is just beyond our control, right?
right.
Right. Sometimes you work in a really large organization, which has a certain type of culture. And I worked in one where, you know, executive presentations were like panic, right?
Oh,
For 100 people for a week, right? When we had to
mhm.
present whatever, XYZ to the person way up at the top.
Yeah,
And there wasn't anything you could do about it. I was not going to be able to effectively change that. But as Nicole has rightly pointed out, there were things I could have been doing for
right.
myself, certainly, that would have helped me manage those processes, deal with them better, recover better, show up better, right? That I can totally control. And I don't have to rely on some cultural intervention or some official, program of well-being or anything to have an impact. And I think that's a really important lesson as well. There's a lot of and
I
maybe that's from the sales background, Nicole. Salespeople have to do this, right? They're often kind of on their own, right? And go get results, Nicole,
Mhm.
or else, right? And it's a different kind of world you're coming from.
Totally. I mean, it's a crucible of its own kind. And I do spend a little bit of time in the book. The first book, obviously, my platform is called The Executive Athlete. But my first book, I had to write what I know, which is my tribe, which is sales.
Hmm.
But I think, overall, to your point, I think the culture of companies is like the nervous system of the executive leadership
Mm,
team at
Hmm.
scale. Like that's what I've
yeah,
seen.
Hmm.
You can absolutely look and sense the culture of a company. And it's an indicator of what that C-suite's regulate physiological regulation is. And I think it's something that is really important. But going back to your sales question, I did grow up in sales. It is incredibly stressful, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's so competitive that we again, I've told every sales exec that I know, especially after writing this book, that like if you really want a competitive advantage, let up off of the gas pedal and actually allow that recovery time. You're going to come into those really big pitch meetings. You're going to come into those really big opportunities balanced, right? And grounded and giving your with a sense of presence if you're regulated. If you've been up late night, up at night the night before, late, if you've had too
Hmm.
many glasses of wine, if you've
Yeah.
eaten too close to your bedtime, your sleep is not what it could have been,
yeah,
and you're going to go into a big pitch meeting the next day, you are going to have brain fog. You're not going to be at your best, right? So there's quite a bit of real estate in the book that I am dedicated to really talking about tips and tricks and tactics and things that you can do to sort of you know work around some of the requirements for sales
Yeah.
folks, that because we do have to network, we do have to be out in the marketplace, but there's
Hmm.
ways you can do it and do it in a really healthy way. So
Yeah.
yeah. My question, as a follow-up to that, Nicole, is gonna be around, you mentioned earlier, we reward this behavior. Steve, you're talking about something I've experienced in my work world too, where if you're at that executive level, not only are you pushed that way, but every other exec is pushed the same
Hmm.
way. And so, um, when we reward executive, especially performance or manager and above performance for working through the night, staying past when your boss leaves. I worked in professional services firm for a long time, and it was truly a badge of honor if you were up at 3 a.m. and working and
Mm.
one of your partners asked for something and you could deliver. So I think my when it comes to rewarding that behavior, I would say, what is something, one thing, whether you're an HR leader or you're a business owner, what's one thing you can do to shift that? What is there something else they could be rewarding instead of that sort of harmful behavior? Um, because I'm afraid like the generations coming in, they don't buy into that. But Gen X
Right.
sure does. We were raised that way and
We
we're
were. We
perpetuating it.
were. Copy
What can
that.
I do to stop perpetuating this with my teams?
Right, right. I think it's a great question, and because I think for every company it's a little bit different, right? And
Mhm.
so depending on your environment, what your company is solving for, how that allowance for recovery or balance shows up. But I think it starts on an individual level with our own agency around going to our boss and going, hey, I can't control what you do with the company. But
Yeah.
for me, as an individual performer at this company, here are the two things I need to then ultimately run through a wall for you, right? Like if you give me a
Oh,
sense of maybe it's psychological safety or maybe it's grace to take that,
mm,
a little bit of an extended lunch hour, to do the, to do some
yeah.
exercise snacking, or maybe it's the grace to have a certain day a week or half a day a week where we work from home, whatever that is for you, right? Depends. Like I said, but finding out on an individual level, what do I need to allow myself to recharge and recover and make sure I'm communicating that upwards so that I'm taken care of, so that I've got that. And that communication I think is really important. And then top down, I think from a company perspective, it's recognizing and owning what is our culture? What are we asking of people? What
Mhm.
when we get our our when we get those surveys back from from teams, what are they saying is the rub, the area of opportunity, where this is sort of, and where we're missing the mark, right? So I think it's top down and I think it's bottom up. But I think each of us as individuals has a real ownership and responsibility to take care of ourselves. And it's not just with our bosses, but communicating it also down with our teams,
Mhm.
to the degree that we have teams.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's great. Again, great suggestions. And I think the only thing I would probably add is taking more agency. And if you're not getting those needs met when you express them, it's okay to go somewhere else. I think there's a little bit of a stigma still about pushing through, right? But maybe sometimes we stay at positions too long where we're
Mhm.
really not being taken care of and it's not going to change. Like Steve, if he had stayed at that company, I'm sure it's probably still running that same way from a
Yeah,
culture
I think it
standpoint,
is. It's doing fine, but it's what it is, right?
So
And
if it
I bet
doesn't
they could be doing
feel
better if they made some changes, right? And how they
right,
approach some
but
of
if
these
you
things.
see also I think it's like, yeah, you can't change everyone and everything, right? So it's sort of also knowing, all right, here is my boundary a little bit, and then maybe finding a company where the culture does align, where it's gonna care for you or allow you to care for yourself, really, right?
Yeah, I think it's, stress changes everything, and stress to everyone is different, right? So
Mhm.
again, it goes back to that, I know for me, as an employee, I mean, we all report to someone, I know what I need to say, look, to my boss, I will run through that wall for you. I will over deliver and be ecstatic to do it, but I need these two things.
Mhm.
And so I think
Oh,
we
I
all
love
need to
that.
find that, but I think it's also recognizing that top down piece to your point,
Yeah.
is that what does stress do to a culture, right? I mean, when any of us are stressed, our focus narrows. We're not the best
Mhm.
listeners in the world. We're not as curious as we could be. Our patience goes out the window. And I think our communications become this sort of transaction as opposed to really dropping in and actually, connecting with people. So I think,
Yeah.
companies at large have to ask ourselves generationally, to your point,
Mhm.
as a Gen Xer, we know what it doesn't look like, but I think younger generations, they are helping to shape what it could and should look like, which
Yeah.
is um, very different than it has and the way we grew up, right?
Yeah. I hear, like, again, people who are in leadership who are in our age range, it's like you feel a little bit like, "Well, we had to pay our dues this way, like,
Mm.
they should have to do it too," and that's part of the cycle. We almost get brainwashed into, like, this is the way to do it. I was recently talking about, so when I was kind of coming up, Jack Welch and his sort of approach with GE was definitely, like, the way up or out, and always cut at least 10% of your workforce every year, like, on and on, right? All the things, and it's weird now being 20 years later and talking to, like, my kids and their friends about work and thinking, like, I still kind of think that old way of doing it is normal from time to time, and I hold myself to that level of performance, and I'm doing often doing myself or Steve or our business a disservice if I'm not also evolving with this caregiving for yourself. I think Steve, we talk about caregiving for everybody else, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
I love, Nicole, that you are bringing all of these little elements of well-being and caregiving and trust and all the things we talk about from a workforce perspective, and you're just, like, putting a spotlight right on it. I can't thank you enough.
Well,
I
and
mean, the book is something I feel like everybody needs this book, and I'm not saying it because 'cause you're sitting in front of me, I'm saying it because, like, I really it kinda like I feel like we have all these little silos of things we all work on in HR. Man, you just zoom it all into one cohesive thought. So,
well,
I appreciate it
thank
so
you.
much.
No, I love hearing that, and it warms my heart because the goal, again, I have a very full-time day job. The goal with this was to really help, right? Because
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
did, I grind, I was a grinder, I was a
Mhm.
driver until I wasn't, and that happens
Yeah.
with all of
Yeah.
us.
Right.
Eventually, we all hit the wall where we go, wow, what does it cost me in my relationships? What does it cost me as a
Mm.
parent? What has it cost me as a leader? And again, all those KPIs and all the revenue in the world, when the rubber starts meeting the road, and that's the late 40s, early 50s,
Yep.
all of a sudden you look around and you're like, wow, I've got miles on these tires and these
Yeah.
tires are ready to fall off. And then it's never too late, but there's such a window of opportunity to start incorporating. Again, don't have to boil the ocean, but
Yeah.
picking the
Yeah.
two or three things. Maybe it's sleep. Maybe it's an app that you wear that holds you accountable,
Yeah.
for what maybe it could be, an application of just tracking your food so you're a little bit healthier. It could be these
Mhm.
little things. Maybe it's just more movement throughout your day. It's just about not beating ourselves up, recognizing where we are and going, okay, what are the two or three pivots that I can make that will, anchor me to moving things forward in a gracious way. And I think it's so important that we start asking ourselves these questions and really doing that evaluation before we hit a wall, which is
Yeah.
again what happened to me, that I would try to
Mhm.
help, hopefully, others not have to do.
Yeah, for sure. Nicole, thank you for spending some time with us today. It's Nicole Elizabeth Ward. The book we've been talking about it a lot. It's called Biohacking for the Sales Athlete. We'll put links in the show notes to that. I tell you, this has been a great conversation, really eye opening.
Mhm.
And I feel, just personally, yeah, I could take some really important takeaways from this. But I
Mhm.
think folks who are listening to this too can not only think about obviously for themselves, but also think about the kind of organization you want to operate in, the kinds of things you want to encourage, the kinds of leaders you want to support and foster, and the workplaces we want to create where we can all really be our best selves and succeed and feel good while doing it. So, Nicole, thanks again for checking in with us today. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And they're welcome. Anyone would like to listen to the podcast, which is, the Executive Athlete Podcast, or, on Instagram and all of those things, and
Yeah,
LinkedIn, they're welcome to explore my content and reach out with any questions. But thank
awesome.
you both for having me. And
Thank
I'm
you.
so grateful to get to know you both.
Yeah, great to see you. Trish, good stuff. Trish, get out there today. Like, be your best self. That's what I'm looking for from you today.
If if I can't have an app like Nicole in my pocket, I'm gonna be having her podcast
There
on
you go. Yeah,
repeat
that's
because
right. Put that in your
no,
pocket.
I
Perfect.
right? I think, Nicole, I mean this so sincerely, like, we do shows all the time, we have guests all the time. what you really said, it just really touched me personally. And I'm really grateful. I feel like I'm hearing your message right at the right time, and I'm
Mhm.
hopeful that our listeners are going to have that same experience. So, for any listener out there, please, please go get this book. It's not just something you're going to read once and put to the side. It's going to just bit by bit change the way you show up for your life, I think. So,
Mhm.
so grateful for you, Nicole.
Trish, thank you. Remember, go to hrhappyhour.net for all the show archives, subscribe, YouTube, all the podcast places, everywhere else. My name's Steve Boese. So grateful for you to listen to the show today. And for our guest, for Trish, we'll see you next time, and bye for now.